A cuckoo in the bush. You want me to clean Snoopy myself? Ugh! Fiona looked at Bibi in disbelief. Not only was she supposed to be riding a horse and not a pony, but now she actually had to do the work that was part of the service at her country club. But it's so much fun, said Bibi with disbelief. She turned back to the other children and helped them scratch out their hooves and saddle their ponies. Fiona was furious. Where had her father dumped her? If she couldn't spend her summer vacation with him, she was at least used to putting her dirty riding boots outside her door in the evening and getting them back shiny again the next morning. And when she wanted to go riding, the horses were always groomed and bridled. Now she had to do all this herself? The only thing missing was that she also had to help clean the stables. Pouting, she grabbed her grooming brush and pulled so hard through Snoopy's mane that the pony whinnied uncomfortably. Careful, Fiona, reminded Tina. Brush along the hairline, and very gently. I know how to do it, Fiona moaned. But Tina had long since noticed that the contractor's daughter had clearly never cleaned a horse. Tina had to pull herself together not to deliver a sharp remark. Her mother had specifically requested her to do so earlier. Mrs. Martin had also noticed how exhausting Fiona could be, but she was, after all, a guest at Martin's farm. You can point out her mistakes in a friendly but firm way, Mrs. Martin had advised Bibi, Tina, and Alex, and please avoid anything that might make the situation more difficult. That's what the three had promised her, and so Tina now patiently explained to Fiona how to groom the coat, hold Snoopy's hooves so she could scratch them out, and show her how to put the saddlecloth on properly, then buckle the saddle. Finally, they put the bridle on together. After Fiona had put on her riding helmet, Tina helped her into the saddle. She could tell straight away that the girl had not had any real lessons at her fancy country club. Take the reins shorter, Tina reminded her. Otherwise, you'll have too little contact with your pony. You're also sitting too far back in the saddle. Only with some reluctance did Fiona follow the instructions. Tina suspected that she would have to keep an eye on Fiona more often during their outing and correct her posture mistakes while riding. We're ready, Alex shouted over to Bibi and Tina. Together with Roger, he had harnessed the two ponies, Max and Moritz, in front of the wagon and loaded the camp children's luggage. Max and Moritz whinnied impatiently. They could hardly wait to finally start the trip. We're ready to go too, Bibi called back. Everyone was now in the saddle and lined up in the order that Bibi, Tina, and Alex had thought of before. Bibi rode Sabrina in front, followed by Lena on Little Shetty, a boy named Lucas on Polly, and Fiona on Snoopy. Tina lined up behind Fiona, where she could keep them in good view. Behind Tina was the wagon with 3 6-year-old girls, and Linus, who steered it. The boy was burning with excitement. He had often sat next to Roger up on the Martins' farm carriage and was already an excellent driver. Now he was mighty proud of his entrusted duty. Alex would ride next to him most of the time and could intervene if something went wrong, which was never really an issue. Max and Moritz hardly ever seemed to get agitated by anything. Bye! Have fun and see you later, shouted Roger. He would come by later in the evening and check in with the kids if everything was all right. Mrs. Martin also came out of the house and waved goodbye. Bibi led the troops from the farm. They headed down the road for a while before turning onto a dirt lane. The path led through the forest to the mill stream, and the group decided to follow its course to the old mill. At this leisurely pace, it took them almost a full hour to cross the forest. When they heard the murmur of the mill stream, Bibi raised her hand, motioning everyone to stop. Time for a picnic, she shouted. Together with the camp children, Bibi, Tina, and Alex built a makeshift paddock and let the horses graze. They spread out picnic blankets and sat on them. Tina handed out paper plates and cups. Bibi unpacked the sandwiches that Mrs. Martin had prepared for the group, and Alex served apple juice. After they had all eaten, the kids stretched out on the blankets, squinting in the warm sun and listening to the frogs squawking in the reeds by the mill stream. A brimstone butterfly settled on Bibi's nose and only fluttered away again when Bibi had to sneeze. Laughing, her eyes followed the butterfly's path through the air. It was then that she noticed that, further back, along a dirt path, someone was crawling around between the bushes and feeling the ground. Bibi poked Tina with her elbow. Look at that man there. He's looking for something. Alex had also noticed him. The 3 friends got up and went over to the man. Hello? Tina shouted to him. Is there anything we can do to help? What's that? The man didn't seem to even notice the children had approached him. Startled, he righted himself through the thick branches of a jasmine bush. The white flowers swirled around him and stuck everywhere, in his gray hair, which stood wildly on end, on the lenses of his horn-rimmed glasses, and on his checked jacket. Confused, he looked from one child to another, but through his smudged glasses could not make out who was standing in front of him. He cleaned them laboriously and put them back on his nose. "Oh, how lovely," he remarked afterwards. "May I? Cuckoo." Bibi and Tina threw each other a confused look. Only Alex had understood, now that the man had told him his name. He remembered that his father had mentioned a professor called Cuckoo earlier. "Are you the historian who's supposed to help my father?" he asked. "In fact, I am a historian," cried Professor Cuckoo. "But who are you?" Now Bibi, Tina, and Alex also introduced themselves. Professor Cuckoo told them how he was on his bicycle heading to Falkenstein Castle when he had missed the turnoff and wanted to study the map again. "But what were you doing in those bushes?" asked Bibi. "My glasses," Professor Cuckoo replied. "Without them, I can't read the map." Bibi and Tina winked at each other amusedly. This was one absent-minded professor. "But sir, you have the glasses on your nose," Tina helped him. Astonished, the professor groped for the frame. "Indeed," he murmured, taking off his glasses, but then he shook his head. "Oh, no, these are my glasses for seeing far away," he explained. "If I want to read, I need my glasses for seeing close up." "And these glasses for seeing close up, are they the ones in your pocket?" asked Bibi, pointing to another pair that was sticking out of the side pocket of the man's jacket. "Oh, well, mumbled the professor and took off his glasses. "I usually put them in my left inside pocket. What are they doing in the outside pocket now?" He took off the far-sided glasses and put on the other glasses. "And the far-sided glasses, do you usually keep them in your left inside pocket?" Alex asked. "Yes, of course. All my glasses belong in the inner left pocket," explained the professor. "That way I can find them much faster." "I'm only asking because you've just put the far-sided glasses in your outside pocket," Alex said with a smile. The professor looked surprised. "I'll be darned! Well observed," he shouted. "Can I hire you as my assistants? Because I'm always moving things and then finding them in the most impossible places." The professor and the kids looked over the map together. As it turned out, it was the wrong map, but Bibi, Tina, and Alex were able to help him anyway. They explained to him that he had to cycle back towards Falkenstein, where he'd soon find a turn-off on the right side leading up to the castle. Professor Cuckoo thanked the children and climbed onto his rickety old bicycle. Bibi, Tina, and Alex waved after him before they went back to the children, and the professor rang his rusty bike bell to say goodbye. He wasn't a very good cyclist, wobbling back and forth with every pedal stroke, but that wouldn't be a problem. The country roads around Falkenstein were practically deserted, and if someone was driving, he or she was generally not in any great hurry. The professor had already become accustomed to the pleasurable silence of the countryside, and therefore flinched when he suddenly heard a wild engine roar and squealing tires. A big shiny blue car came racing down the winding road from the direction of the castle. It was swerving into the opposite lane, and the driver did not notice the tottering professor until the last minute. With a hard brake, the car came to a skidding halt just in front of his bicycle. The professor was so shocked that he forgot to pedal, and with a boop, simply fell sideways. This time, the far-sided glasses actually flew from his nose, and he began to grope helplessly for them in the grass beside the road. He heard the driver get out of the car and approach him, ranting as he came nearer. My, man, if you were a motorist, I'd have said you won a driver's license in the lottery." The professor, who had found his glasses again and was about to put them on his face, paused in surprise. He knew that voice. When the driver reached out to help him, the professor grabbed his arm and was swung upwards. "You're kidding! I can't believe it!" cried the driver. "If it isn't my old friend Albertus Cuckoo." The professor put on his glasses and shouted in surprise. Well, if it isn't the good-for-nothing Jake Overland, who always stole my marbles." "Oh, no, it wasn't like that," the contractor protested, laughing. "I won them all fair and square. But tell me, are you the cuckoo that this count is expecting up at his castle?" "Indeed I am," confirmed the professor. By the way, I was thinking about you recently. I am currently researching the family history of Count von Falkenstein. In some old documents, there is actually talk about one of your ancestors, Oswald Overland, the steward of the Count's family in the Middle Ages. One source even reports that Francis von Falkenstein is said to have transferred land to him. But this is probably only a legend, because a legally valid document with the seal of Francis has never appeared anywhere before. Mr. Overland listened attentively to these words. Well, that's interesting, he murmured. Albertus, he suddenly exclaimed, you must tell me more about this. First thing tomorrow, I'm coming up there to visit you in that old shack. Professor Cuckoo hesitated. He didn't know the Count and wondered if it would be appropriate for him to receive visitors at the castle. Perhaps I should ask the Count's permission first, he objected. But Mr. Overland wiped away all doubts with a sweeping gesture of his hand. Let's not make it so complicated, he shouted. I know that the Count takes his afternoon nap every day. Tomorrow I'll be by your side, and the Count won't give it a second thought. Professor Cuckoo wanted to reply, but Mr. Overland did not let him speak. With a, "Bye, Albertus," he jumped into his car, roared off, and was out of sight around the next bend. Under the Starry Sky. After their picnic, Bibi, Tina, and Alex set off again together with the rest of the children. A short while later, they reached their destination, the meadow at the mill pond. There they wanted to set up camp. They found a nice place for the paddock, and after unsaddling their horses and ponies, they let them graze in the fresh green meadow. They pitched their tents a little way from the bank of the pond. After all the children had unpacked and arranged their belongings, they gathered dry branches and twigs in the grove to build a campfire for cooking dinner. They roasted delicious potatoes, which they placed in the embers, and marshmallows, which sizzled on long sticks over the fire. The children had a lot of fun. Only Fiona seemed to have a problem with everything. Bibi, Tina, and Alex tried to be friendly to the girl, but when Fiona pushed the plate of food away from her with a bratty moan, Bibi finally let out a remark. I don't know what your problem is. Everybody enjoys it here but you. You're also the only one who doesn't appreciate the food. I don't like this, Fiona sulked. Man, you're a real spoil sport, Linus laid into her. Fiona also began to spoil the mood for the other kids at the camp. If you don't want to eat, why don't you just go to bed, Luke added. Hey guys, don't fight. Tina tried to mediate. At this, Fiona barked, I'll just go to sleep then. You're all stupid anyway. She got up and ran over to her tent. Bibi wanted to follow her, but Tina held her back. Don't, Bibi, she whispered to a friend. Let her sulk a bit. Tomorrow she'll calm down again, and then we'll try to talk to her reasonably. All right, Bibi sighed and sat back down in the grass. The fight with Fiona was soon forgotten. They sat around the campfire until late in the evening and told exciting stories. When the sun had almost set, a rider approached. It was Roger on Pascal, who wanted to know if everything was okay. He warned the children about going to bed too late, wished everyone a good night, and then rode back to Martin's farm to help his mother with the other camp guests. Bibi, Tina, and Alex sat together around the campfire for quite a while. They listened to the crackling and snapping of the fire, mesmerized by the flickering flames. The stars sparkled in the night-black sky and reflected in the water of the mill pond. There, a shooting star, cried Tina. Now you can make a wish, Bibi reminded her. Tina closed her eyes. She knew immediately what she would wish for, that it would stay this beautiful forever, with her boyfriend Alex and her best friend Bibi, with her mother and Roger at their beloved Martin's farm. Well, what did you wish for? Alex asked curiously as Tina opened her eyes again. I can't tell you, replied his girlfriend. Otherwise the wish will not come true. Suddenly, one of the ponies in the paddock started neighing. Amadeus and Sabrina joined in. Maharaja also snorted loudly. Bibi, Tina, and Alex looked around but couldn't see anything that might have frightened the horses. Everything's okay, shouted Bibi to the horses, who calmed down. The three sat there in silence and looked out at the mill pond. The trouble with Fiona seemed far behind them now. No one gave a second thought anymore to the girl who they figured was already fast asleep like the other children. But they were wrong. Fiona had crawled into her sleeping bag and, sulking, pulled the zipper up over her nose. But she could not sleep. She was angry. The things those camp kids come up with. To tell her she was irritating. They were the ones who were annoying, and Bibi, Tina, and Alex could beat it. She wouldn't last one day longer with them. As she was lying alone in her tent, the thought suddenly occurred to her to leave. But how could she do that? She wouldn't get far on foot. No, not on foot, she thought. But she still had Snoopy. She didn't like him much, but he was better than no horse at all. Fiona could barely contain her excitement. She would have loved to go outside immediately, grab Snoopy and ride away. But she had to wait until the other children had gone to bed, and that lasted for quite a while. Finally, the two girls with whom she shared the tent came in. Fiona pretended to be asleep. The two of them slipped into their sleeping bags and whispered quietly to each other. Not long after, Fiona could hear the rhythm of their breathing and knew they had both fallen asleep. It was also very quiet in the neighboring tent. Only from the campfire could one still make out the distant voices of Bibi, Tina, and Alex. Fiona carefully pulled open the zipper on her sleeping bag. Earlier, she had gone to bed in riding pants and a t-shirt. Now she was happy about it because it meant she didn't have to change in the dark. She slipped on her sweater, which she had rolled up as a pillow on the mat, grabbed her small pink backpack, which had been lying next to her head, and groped her way to the tent exit. Fiona had to be careful not to bump into one of the sleeping girls and wake her up. Her fingers found the tent zipper. Slowly, she pulled it up just a little bit, slipped out, and zipped it shut. Once outside, Fiona pulled on her riding boots, which she had left in front of the tent, and crept over to the paddock. Snoopy had dozed off, standing upright just on the other side of the fence. After their arrival, the children had put the bridles and the saddles over a fallen tree trunk. Fiona still knew where Snoopy's tack was. She clamped the bridle under her arm, picked up the heavy saddle and saddlecloth, and climbed over the fence. Now she was glad that Tina had explained to her at Martin's farm how to saddle Snoopy and put the bridle on. The pony seemed to find this nocturnal disturbance irritating. He stomped restlessly from one hoof to the other. Fiona tightened the girth, but when she pulled the bridle straps over Snoopy's head, he protested with a neigh. This prompted Sabrina and Amadeus to give their own response, and Maharaja also chimed in with a loud snort. Fiona winced and ducked behind the back of the pony. Bibi, Tina, and Alex could of course hear the neighing. Would they come and see what was going on? It seemed like an eternity until she finally heard Bibi assuring, "Everything is all right." In fact, the horses even seemed to calm down again. Fiona took Snoopy by the reins and led him to the edge of the makeshift paddock. She chose the side facing away from the mill pond. Bibi, Tina, and Alex didn't notice how she pulled one of the lightweight poles out of the ground, let Snoopy step over the rope, and then put the pole back in. Fiona led Snoopy a little bit further, then put her left foot in the stirrup and pulled herself up. She managed to swing herself into the saddle on the first try and squeezed hard several times with her heels when it appeared Snoopy didn't want to move. He finally gave in and set forth at a slow walking pace. One couldn't make him go any faster, even if they wanted to. Neither Fiona nor her pony could see the forest floor in the darkness. Snoopy kept bumping his hooves against thick roots or slipping when the ground was uneven. When the forest cleared, Fiona could see in the starlight that their course was going uphill. Snoopy patiently made the climb, but when they had reached the top of the hill, only rocks and boulders were spread out in front of them, and the pony refused to go any further. No matter how hard Fiona pushed Snoopy, he simply wouldn't budge. "This wouldn't have happened to me with a real horse," she scolded, and hopped off. She tugged at Snoopy's reins, but even now the pony didn't want to move again. "You are going to move! Now go!" shouted Fiona, but all she could do was make Snoopy anxious. She yanked on the reins quickly and firmly, but succeeded only in agitating the pony even further. It whinnied and reared. Startled, Fiona jumped back. She hadn't noticed that she was standing right next to the edge of a rock. Her foot went down, but misjudged the step entirely. She slipped, fell lengthwise, and slid even further, hitting the bottom hard and getting her right foot caught in a crevice. She screamed in pain. Up on the rock, Snoopy fell silent. He looked down at Fiona in the darkness and snorted as if to ask if she was all right. The girl saw him high above her against the starry sky. "Snoopy!" she cried helplessly. She tugged at her leg and tried to free her foot from the crevice, but in vain. It took a moment before she truly understood what had happened. Panic rose up inside of her. She was all alone between those rocks. Without help, she would never get out of there. A savior in need. A few glowing embers were all that was left of the campfire at Mill Pond. Bibi, Tina, and Alex had not noticed how late it was. Alex had just glanced at his wristwatch, about to suggest it was time for them to go to sleep, when a neighing could be heard from off in the distance. "Is there a horse running free?" Tina asked, puzzled. She knew that there were no paddocks near the old mill. Moreover, the neighing was getting closer and closer, until, without warning, a gray pony shot out between the bushes and ran across the meadow towards the three children. "Snoopy!" cried Bibi in surprise. The pony threw his head back upright and neighed as loud as he could, stomping excitedly with his hooves. "Whoa, Snoopy!" Alex tried to calm the nervous pony. "You'll wake up the kids!" But that had already happened. One after the other, zippers were going up at the entrances of the three guest tents and sleepy faces began peering out. Snoopy still whinnied, and the children began to whisper excitedly to each other. "He must have escaped from the paddock," Tina considered. "But why is he saddled?" At that moment they heard loud voices. The two girls who shared the tent with Fiona came running over to Bibi, Tina, and Alex. "Fiona is gone!" they shouted. "And she took her backpack with her!" At once, the three friends realized what this meant. Fiona had run away. She had taken Snoopy out of the paddock, saddled him, and ridden away. But why had the pony returned alone? There was really only one explanation. Something must have happened to Fiona. "She can't ride very well," Tina said. "Maybe she fell." The whole camp was now stirring. The other kids also came out of their tents and chatted wildly. Snoopy whinnied again and pointed his head toward the forest. "He wants to lead us to Fiona," cried Alex. "Yes," Bibi agreed. "We have to follow him." "Alex will stay here with the children, and Bibi and I will go looking for Fiona," Tina quickly decided. "And if we don't find her, we must tell Roger and my mother. But first, let's try this." Bibi and Tina got their flashlights and followed Snoopy, who had already walked to the edge of the meadow. "Take good care of yourselves," Alex shouted after them. Snoopy seemed relieved that the children had finally understood what he wanted from them. He let himself be taken by the reins, but pushed forward in a hurry. Bibi and Tina had trouble keeping up with him. "We can't go as fast as you, Snoopy," complained Tina. "We only have 2 legs." But Snoopy did not let up. He leaned on the reins and led the two girls through the forest, snorting loudly. Fiona was nearly in despair. Snoopy had watched her from above and neighed a few more times. She had tried to explain to him that she was stuck and could not climb back up. But of course the pony couldn't understand that. Or had he? Snoopy had suddenly run away, and the night around Fiona fell still. She let herself sink to the ground and began to cry bitterly. Never before had she felt so lonely and abandoned. The wind had picked up quite a bit, whistling and howling around the rocks. Although Fiona was wearing her sweater, she soon began to freeze. The rocky ground beneath her was cold, and she shivered all over her body. Surely the other children would only notice the next morning that she was not in her tent. Only then would Bibi, Tina, and Alex start looking for her. Slowly, Fiona realized what an unbelievably stupid thing she had done. Running away, in the middle of the night. She was cold and her foot hurt. And what would her father say to all this? Would he even miss her? He never had time for her, she thought. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She cried so loudly that at first she didn't even hear the neighing that approached the rocks. But then she heard the clattering of hooves and 2 familiar voices. "Fiona!" cried Bibi and Tina. "Fiona, where are you?" The 2 of them had actually already started looking for her. "I'm down here," she wailed loudly. "I've slipped down the rock and my foot's stuck. I can't move it." From above, the head of the little pony appeared, and next to it the faces of Bibi and Tina. Snoopy let out an encouraging whinny at Fiona. "We'll get you back up in no time," cried Tina. But Bibi and Tina quickly discovered that it was easier said than done. Fiona was only a short distance below them, but the rock was slippery, and there was a good chance that the two girls would slip off as well during the rescue effort. "We need a rope to pull her up," Tina said. "We have one on the ladder truck, but it will take quite a long time if we have to walk back to the camp first. Besides, we can't pull her up that easily," Bibi objected. "We have to climb down and check her foot." She looked at her friend with a serious expression. "Don't you think this is an emergency now?" Tina knew what she was getting at. Bibi had promised Mrs. Martin a long time ago not to use magic on the farm and on the rides. Only in an extreme emergency would Tina's mother make an exception. And this situation, which Tina saw just as clearly as Bibi, was definitely an emergency. Fiona had possibly injured herself and needed help quickly. "Go on then," Tina said to her friend. "Do it now." On the spot, Bibi stretched out her hands and began a spell. "Eeny, meeny, dogfish bladder, from the rock an iron ladder, whiz, whiz." Sparkling magic stars surged along the rock from Bibi's fingers with a whooshing sound, and at once, iron rungs appeared in the stone. Fiona couldn't believe her eyes when Bibi and Tina descended the magic ladder to her side. Snoopy snorted excitedly. "Come, lean on my shoulder," Tina told Fiona when they arrived at the bottom. Fiona held on to her while Bibi and Tina moved her leg carefully. Her foot was wedged in the crevice, and the two friends had to turn it gently to pull it out. At last, Fiona was free again. She tried to stand up, and to her relief became aware that the foot was apparently not broken. It hurt a bit, but that, Tina said, would probably just be a sprain. Bibi was the first to climb up the ladder. Fiona followed close behind her, and after that came Tina, who supported her while climbing. Fiona couldn't believe she was saved so quickly. While they were still climbing up the ladder, she asked Bibi and Tina how they knew to go looking for her in the middle of the night. "Yeah, you got Snoopy to thank for that," answered Bibi with a laugh. "He immediately ran to the tent camp and alarmed us," Tina explained. "Snoopy saved me?" Fiona thought, and all of a sudden she felt warm in her heart. So the pony had not abandoned her as she had feared. On the contrary, he had been worried about Fiona and had gone for help. Arriving on top of the rock, Snoopy greeted the girl. He nudged her with his velvety snout and gave a cheerful whinny. "My dear Snoopy," cried Fiona, squeezing her arms around the pony's neck. "You saved me! You're the greatest pony in the world!" The Seal. Happy shouting and laughing pervaded the camp. It was almost noon. Alex had marked out a slalom course in the meadow on the opposite bank of the mill pond and showed the children how to lead the ponies around the obstacles by only using their legs. Fiona didn't take part. After last night's shock, she had slept in late for the first time. Afterwards, Bibi and Tina took the opportunity to have a quiet chat with Fiona. To their surprise, the girl was quite agreeable. When the two friends finally asked her if she would rather go home, Fiona looked at them questioningly. "You want me to leave? I mean, you're right. I really messed up." But Bibi and Tina had not meant it that way. They just thought Fiona had run away because she wanted to see her father again. They had no intention of sending her away, and they told her so. "You're welcome to stay, but only under one condition," warned Tina. "You'll never do anything like that what you did last night again." Fiona shook her head. "No, I most certainly won't," she promised. What Fiona said sounded credible, and Bibi and Tina were relieved. For their part, they now promised not to tell anyone about the nighttime disappearance, not even Roger, who would surely come to bring lunch at any moment. "This stays between us. We'll sort it out with the others," said Bibi. Fiona was visibly relieved, and for the two girls, the matter was settled. Fiona was desperate to check on Snoopy. She ran over to the paddock where the pony greeted her with a happy neigh. She stroked Snoopy and snuggled up against his neck. "Looks like the two of them have become best friends," Bibi said happily. At the same time, lunch had just finished at Falkenstein Castle. Count Falko von Falkenstein dabbed his lips with a flower-white napkin and leaned back comfortably in his chair. "That was quite impressive, my dear Ethelbert," he praised his butler, who bowed and then began to clear the dishes. "Allow me, Professor, to draw your attention to your spectacles," said Ethelbert as he reached for Albertus Cuckoo's plate. "My glasses?" the professor asked confusedly. "Haven't I got them resting on my nose?" "One pair is," replied the butler, "but the other one is lying here under your napkin." "Oh, I'll be darned, shouted the professor, and tried to put his nearsighted specs into his jacket. Left, the Count reminded him. Excuse me? The professor asked. I thought you said you always kept your glasses in the inside left pocket. Just now you wanted to put them in the right pocket. Count Falko von Falkenstein smiled. In the short time they had been working together, he had already grown accustomed to the fact that the scatterbrained professor was constantly losing and looking for something. As long as he doesn't misplace any important documents, it's fine with me, the Count thought amusedly. He was now comfortably full and sleepy, but before the Count retired for his nap, he had to show the professor something he had discovered shortly before lunch. May I again request your opinion on a matter? He asked his guest. But at any time, kind sir, Professor Cuckoo assured. He was completely in his element here at the castle. There was nothing he liked better than to browse through books and examine old documents. But what Count Falko von Falkenstein had discovered was not a document. Upstairs in the library, the Count showed the professor his find, which had apparently been kept for centuries in a worm-eaten wooden box. Look, Professor, said the Count, and opened the lid. I see, muttered the historian as he bent over the box in suspense. Well, I'll be darned, he gushed out excitedly. Is it real? Asked Count Falko von Falkenstein. I should think so, replied the professor. Of course, I can only tell you more precise details once I have examined it. The Count handed him the box, and the historian sat down at his desk. There, beside a magnifying glass, lay the white gloves that the professor always put on when he touched sensitive documents. He slipped on the gloves and brought out of the box a flat, reddish-brown circular object, about the size of a chocolate cookie. He carefully laid it on the table and studied it closely. The object was engraved with the coat of arms from the von Falkenstein family. A falcon with an open beak. A Latin inscription ran in a circle around the coat of arms. It was worn out, but Professor Cuckoo could clearly read the word Franciscus. It seems, he said after a while, as if this is indeed the seal of Francis von Falkenstein. It must have fallen off an old document and someone has kept it in this box. The Count was beaming. It really was a sensational discovery. Only a few documents had ever been preserved from Francis, the grandson of the founder of the castle, and his seal was only known to the Count from a picture in a medieval chronicle. I'll try to decipher the inscription, promised Professor Cuckoo, who had already bent over the seal with a magnifying glass. Do that, cried the Count. Meanwhile, I will withdraw for a while. See you later, Professor. Professor Cuckoo no longer answered. With zeal, he was already closely eyeing the inscription, letter by letter. Outside in the corridor, the Count reminded his butler once more that he did not want to be disturbed during his nap under any circumstances, and went next door into his bedroom. There was silence in the castle for almost an hour, until suddenly the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, the butler was unpleasantly surprised to see the building contractor, Jake Overland, again standing in front of him. The Count is not available for anyone, pronounced Ethelbert briefly, and was about to close the door when the contractor shuffled up to him and stood in the middle of the doorway. Wait a minute, he said. I'm not here to see the Count. Then whom do you wish to speak to? The butler asked suspiciously. My good old friend Albertus Cuckoo, cried Mr. Overland. Or to put it in your words, the historian, who is currently staying in your castle. Ethelbert should have notified the Count immediately. But hadn't he received strict instructions not to disturb Count Falko von Falkenstein during his catnap? Under no circumstances, and under no circumstances whatsoever? Before the butler had even thought the matter through, he was again astounded by Mr. Overland. Now let us not complicate things more than necessary, cried the contractor, gently pushing Ethelbert aside. Professor Cuckoo and I have an appointment. With that, he went straight through the hall to the stairs. But, the butler stammered and hurried after the contractor. You can't just... Oh, but I can, laughed Mr. Bigshot cheekily and hurried up the stairs to the first floor. The butler was unable to overtake the contractor before he reached the library. With a booming, Good day, Albertus! The stout man ripped the door open. Startled, Professor Cuckoo jumped in his seat, sending the nearsighted glasses right off his nose. May I help you? He said. searching the direction of the door. He groped for his glasses, couldn't find them, and finally put on his far-sighted pair. Only now did he recognize his old friend and schoolmate. "Oh, it's you, Jake," he said. Relieved, Butler Ecclebert closed the door. Indeed, the professor seemed to be expecting the contractor, so everything seemed to be right. Meanwhile, Jake Overland had taken a seat next to Professor Cuckoo without being asked. "So this is the paperwork you spend your short days with," he commented on the chaos on the desk. "And what's this old thing?" He pointed to the seal of Francis von Falkenstein. The historian began to talk about the sensational find. But why the seal was so unique did not interest the contractor. Instead, he wanted to learn about the lands that Francis von Falkenstein may have transferred to his ancestor, Oswald Overland. But Professor Cuckoo had to disappoint him. "A legal document has not appeared," he said. "I guess it's just a legend after all." Mr. Overland put an index finger to his fleshy nose and thought. He kept going, and so, until it suddenly dawned on him. "Tell me, Albertus, what does such a legal document actually look like?" "Well, basically like this." Professor Cuckoo showed him the document of a descendant of Francis von Falkenstein, who had bequeathed the manor house to his faithful servant. "The script itself is not the most important thing," he explained. "The documents were written by a writing workshop. What is important is the seal. Without a seal, the document is worth nothing. Wax was dripped on the document and the family crest was embossed. A seal is usually firmly attached to the document, only sometimes, when a seal has come off the paper, a seal without the writing can be found, like in our case here with the seal of Francis von Falkenstein." This was a little too complicated for Jake Overland, but at least he thought he had grasped the essentials. "On a certificate for Oswald Overland, therefore, the seal of this Francis must be stuck on," he mused. "A writing workshop will do the rest. Tell me, Albertus, is there still such a thing? And do you perhaps know somebody who does such a thing?" Professor Cuckoo could not help with that. He only knew that sometimes such documents were made as props for medieval movies. "But of course, without a seal, they are immediately recognizable as forgery," he added. Again, Mr. Overland put his index finger to his nose. "Maybe an old buddy could help me there," he muttered to himself. "Anyway, he owes me a favor." Out of the blue, he slapped the professor forcefully on the shoulder and shouted in a resounding voice, "Thank you, Albertus. You've helped me a lot." The professor almost fell off his chair when he was hit, and it took him a short moment to pick himself up again. A short moment in which he did not see Mr. Overland take something from his desk and put it in the pocket of his suit. "I won't keep you any longer," cried the contractor before rushing to the door. He threw it open vigorously and shouted a "Bye, my dear," on his way down the corridor. Professor Cuckoo didn't even know what had happened to him. His old friend and schoolmate came to visit him and left immediately. But what had he wanted? "These businessmen are strange people," he thought with a sigh as he turned back to the seal of Francis von Falkenstein. At first he thought he was wearing the wrong glasses again when he couldn't find the seal on the desk in front of him. He switched the glasses on his nose with the glasses from the left inner pocket of his jacket, but that only made things worse. Regardless of the glasses he wore, the only thing in front of him was a mountain of old documents, but no seal. The professor began hastily shuffling through his jacket. Could he have accidentally put the seal in his pocket? No, it wasn't there, and it wasn't in the outside pockets either. "Ugh! Do I always have to move everything?" he scolded, lowering himself on his knees to scan the floor. Count Falko von Falkenstein had entrusted this seal to him. It was unique. It was irreplaceable. He had to find it if he searched every nook and cranny of this library.